Namaste, namaskaram, vanakkam, namo namaha, jai Ganesha, jai Hindu Yoga Dharma. So, folks, this is a post-mortem, if you will, the day after the International Yoga Day. So this is quite a lengthy one. We may divide it into a couple of parts, but I hope you all take this very seriously. So, obviously, we looked at this International Yoga Day, and for an analysis here, we look to our Chandogya Upanishad. And we're going to title this, was International Yoga Day really International Virocana Day? Now, many of you will know this story from the Chandogya Upanishad of Virocana and Indra and Prajapati. But let's take a deep dive. Did humanity begin the journey of Indra? Or did it leave with Virocana, satisfied with his own reflection? The morning or the days after the International Yoga Day has come and gone. Across the world, enormous groups assembled in carefully ordered rows, bodies stretched, bent, balanced, breathed, and posed for cameras. Political leaders participated. Public institutions celebrated. Photographs displayed impressive formations of human bodies performing what the modern world has been taught to recognize as quote-unquote yoga. The official theme for International Yoga Day 2026 was, quote, yoga for healthy aging, unquote. Now, the intention was admirable, to encourage people of every age to remain healthy, active, independent, and engaged. Nothing wrong with caring for the body, very important. Nothing wrong with helping others. Anyone, and especially the elderly, need to preserve their balance, their mobility, strength, and dignity. The body is, of course, an instrument of dharma and should not be neglected. But the morning after International Yoga Day, a more difficult question has to be asked. Did the world really celebrate yoga? Or did it celebrate the body and place the name yoga beneath the photograph? The ancient Chandogya Upanishad gives us an astounding framework through which to examine this question. It speaks of two disciples, Indra and Virocana. They approached their guru, Prajapati, seeking knowledge of the deathless Atmana. Remember, that's the meaning of the word yoga, Yujatman Brahmancha. Their story may expose precisely what has happened to yoga in the modern world. And remember, this was written thousands of years ago, so again, nothing new under the sun. The two disciples approached Prajapati. Prajapati declared that the true self is free from evil, old age, death, sorrow, hunger, and thirst. This self, if you will, possesses true desire and true resolve. Whoever discovers this Atmana attains fulfillment. Both the Devas and the Asuras heard of this teaching. Indra came as the representative of the chief of the Devas. Virocana came as a representative of the Asuras. Although they belonged to opposing orders of being, both approached the same guru. Both carried sacrificial fuel in their hands, the traditional sign of humility before the guru. And both lived with Prajapati in Brahmacharya for 32 years. Wow. Today, a person may complete a 200-hour course and become a professionally certified, quote-unquote, yoga teacher. And for 500 hours, a registered yoga therapist. Yet, in Chandogya Upanishad, 32 years of disciplined preparation was required before the disciples were given their first examination. What was that examination? Prajapati told them to look at themselves in the water, nature's mirror, the second chakra, reason. What did they see? Indra and Virocana looked into the water and saw their reflected bodies. Prajapati then instructed them to clean themselves, dress themselves, adorn themselves. When they looked again, the reflected figures were likewise clean, dressed, and adorned. They looked attractive. The reflection looked attractive. Both disciples initially concluded this visible person is the self. Virocana was satisfied. He departed from Prajapati and returned to the Asuras. He taught them that the bodily self is to be honored, adorned, gratified, and served. Now, Virocana did not simply misunderstand the teachings. He became a teacher of the misunderstanding. He saw the reflection and mistook it for reality. This is the first and most superficial form of self-identification. Same old Narcissus. I am this body. I am my visible form, strength, flexibility, beauty, youth, clothing, ornamentation, and what other people see. Now note, Virocana studied for 32 years. Looked into the mirror and saw the body, and that's it. The international mirror, what did the world see when it looked into the mirror of International Yoga Day? It saw bodies, flexible bodies, aging bodies, youthful bodies, disciplined bodies, political bodies, photographed bodies, televised bodies, and bodies arranged in impressive public formations. The ancient water vessel has become the studio mirror, the camera lens, the smartphone, the promotional photograph, social media page upon which the yoga body is displayed, evaluated, admired, marketed, and sold. International Yoga Day did not merely place people before a mirror. It placed yoga itself before the mirror, and then, in large measure, mistook the bodily reflection for yoga's complete identity. Now, the problem is not simply the body. The problem is stopping where Virocana stopped. Yoga for healthy aging, or self beyond age, the theme for this year, makes the Upanishadic comparison particularly striking. Indra and Virocana were seeking the self, the Atmana, that is beyond old age and death. International Yoga Day asked, how can yoga help the body age more healthily? The Upanishads ask, who are you when the body ages? These are not the same questions. The first concerns the condition of the body. The second concerns the identity of the self. Yoga may indeed help the body age with greater balance, mobility, clarity, and strength, all fine. But the yoga of the Upanishads does not promise that the body will never grow old. It asks us a deeper question, to discover that which cannot be reduced to the body that grows old. The body can be healthy or sick, young or old, beautiful or scared, flexible or stiff. The body is eventually left behind. Yoga may help the body age well, but yoga cannot be reduced to the body that ages. Now, Indra initially leaves with Virocana, apparently accepting the same answer. But before reaching the Devas, doubt awakens within him. If the body becomes blind, injured, disfigured, or disabled, its reflection likewise will appear afflicted. When the body dies, the reflected person disappears. How then can the body be the immortal and fearless Atmana? Indra turns around. He returns to Prajapati, carrying the sacred fuel once again. And Prajapati does not simply give Indra a final verbal formula at the beginning. He allows Indra to live with him, teaching again through clear discernment. The Guru is not merely placing information into the student, he's awakening vivek, discrimination, discernment. Prajapati tells Indra that his objection is correct and instructs him to remain for another 32 years. Now, Virocana accepts the first answer and becomes a teacher. Indra questions the first answer and remains a disciple. Virocana accepts the first answer and becomes a teacher. Indra becomes the disciple. Beyond the physical body, after another 32 years, Prajapati teaches Indra about the self that moves within his dreams. This is subtler than the visible body. In dreams, one may travel without the physical legs, see without the physical eyes, and enter into worlds of symbolism, devotion, fear, wonder, pleasure, and pain. Yet Indra again recognizes a problem. This dream self is still vulnerable. In dreams, one may be frightened, pursued, wounded, humiliated, made to suffer. Dreams arise and disappear. The dream identity is no more permanent than the bodily identity. So Indra returns again. Prajapati tells him to remain for another 32 years. Indra has now undertaken 96 years of discipleship. Again, the modern yoga world promotes a 200-hour credential, 500 hours. The Upanishad gives us a disciple who has studied for 96 years and still has not received the final teaching. Therefore, yoga is not merely information to be memorized, movements to be demonstrated, or a professional skill to be certified. It is a progressive destruction, subtraction, of mistaken identity. So then Prajapati teaches him about dreamless sleep. In deep sleep, the visible body is no longer consciously perceived. Dreams have ceased. The mind's images and distinctions become silent. From the waking perspective, it seems almost like no thangness. This may tempt the seeker to believe that the mere absence of thought is liberation. But deep sleep is not the final Atmana. It's not Kaivalya. It's not Turiya. Every person enters deep sleep, yet awakens carrying the same attachments, confusions, fears, misidentifications that existed before sleep. So the absence of mental activity is not necessarily self-realization or Atma-darshana. Unconscious stillness is not necessarily awakened freedom. So Indra recognizes this. In deep sleep, the sleeper does not consciously know I am the Atmana. He appears almost to have been extinguished. So Indra asks, in effect, what's the value of this absolute condition in which the self does not consciously know itself? Dreamless. It is not enough to disappear into blankness, deny the body and the world, or call unconsciousness liberation. So Prajapati, the ever-patient guru, again tells Indra that he has reasoned correctly. This time he instructs him to remain for another 5 years. The full discipleship is 32 plus 32 plus 32 plus 5. 101 years. Of course, over the top, but it's to prove a point here. Beyond waking, beyond dreaming, and even beyond dreamless or deep sleep. The final teaching of the Guru points toward the deathless, bodiless Atmana. that is not confined to the waking, the dream personality, or the unconsciousness of deep sleep. This movement anticipates the teaching later expressed with extraordinary precision in the simple but profound Mandukya Upanishad, Vaishvanada Tejasya Prajna. Waking, dreaming, dreamless, and something or no thing else. Not even Satchit Ananda at this depth. Even sacred terms must be handled carefully. We speak of the Atmana and Brahman as Satchit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. These are indispensable pointers, if you will. But they cannot become another object with which the individual ego identifies. One cannot finally say, quote, I, this separate person, now identify with Turiya, unquote. Such a statement still preserves an identifier, an act of identification, and something with which the identifier identifies. Turiya is not the successful adoption of a higher spiritual identity. It is the collapse of the imagined separation among the identifier, identification, and identified. Now, if bliss arises, it can subside. If light appears, it may disappear. If energy intensifies, it may weaken. Ananda Jyoti Shakti. If peace, Shanti, is entered, it can be left. Whatever appears and disappears belongs to the field of experience, however subtle. The Atmana, however, cannot be merely another appearance within that field. Turiya is not the brightest experience appearing within consciousness. It is that because of which brightness, darkness, peace, disturbance, thought, dream, and apparent absence are known. A great mystic from Sri Lanka used to say, to speak is to lie. This does not mean that every ordinary sentence is a deliberate moral falsehood. It means that when we attempt to speak of ultimate reality, speech inevitably divides what is not divided. Language requires distinctions. Speaker and spoken, subject and object, this and that, knower and known, before and after. But the reality toward which Turiya points is not one side of any distinction. To say it is light distinguishes light from dark. To say it is bliss distinguishes bliss from suffering. To say it is beyond creates an imagined place called beyond. Even the word Turiya is not Turiya. It is only a word placed at the edge of speech. The word fire does not burn. The word sweetness has no taste. The word silence itself breaks silence. Now, the Upanishads and life in general must use words to point beyond words. The word is necessary. That's why we take words seriously. Bhagarta vihiva sampriktau. Words and their meanings are ever united like a marriage. Rishi Kalidasa. Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali vastu sunyo vikalpaha. If you take word knowledge devoid of facts, you enter into delusion. So words are very necessary. Yoga. Yujatma Brahmancha. Nedeha. Now, let's look at from 101 years to 200 hours. Here the contrast with modern yoga becomes unavoidable. Virocana studied, for 32 years. Just think of that. And still mistook the body for the self. Indra, however, studied for 101 years, repeatedly rejected incomplete understandings, and remained humble before the Guru. Today's yoga industry really begins where Virocana stopped. bodily anatomy, alignment, movement, flexibility, safety, appearance, instruction, and a professional presentation. And remember, he went back to the Asuras and noticed all the major scandals that have happened since the 60s in the quote-unquote yoga movement. Now, these subjects of bodily concern are useful, but they do not constitute the whole picture. A simplistic 200-hour course, it might provide some introduction to posture, sequencing, anatomy, classroom management, but it cannot confer mastery of the apana. It cannot compress waking, dreaming, deep sleep, dreamless, and transcendental realization into a certificate. A credential can certify that hours were completed, but it can in no way certify Atmadarshana, self-knowledge. Again, Virocana studied for 32 years and became a teacher of the body. Modern yoga studies for 200 hours and certifies another teacher of the body. These credentials can certify that hours were completed, but not certify Atmadarshana. Now, there's another serious irony here. When the modern yoga publicly uses the word yoga, it should actually be called Hatha Yoga. These are asanas, bodily postures, controlled breathing, balance, stretching, historically linked with the subtle bodies, the nadis, the chakras, kundalini, mudras, samadhi. Yet, the great Hatha Yoga text never presented these bodily and energetic disciplines as a public fitness performance detached from liberation. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika opens by saluting Adinada, which is Siva, as the original teacher of Hatha Vidya. And it presents Hatha as a stairway to Raja Yoga. Its chapters proceed through asana, pranayama, mudra, kundalini, samadhi. The body is disciplined, but the bodily display is not the final aim. The knowledge of Hatha is to be guarded by the yogin, who seeks accomplishment. Kept protected, it retains its potency. Indiscriminately publicized, it loses that. How could there be a more dramatic contrast with International Yoga Day? All the texts on Hatha Yoga say guard it. The modern spectacle says display it. The traditional texts all say transmit it carefully to the prepared shishya, chela. The modern institution says assemble thousands before cameras. The text directs Hatha towards Siddhi and Raja Yoga. The public presentation reduces it to posture, health, flexibility, aging well, and visual performance. The private and initiatory wisdom of the yogins becomes a mass, crass demonstration. The sacred discipline becomes a photograph. The inward practice becomes a public relations event. Hatha vidya param gopya yogina siddhim ichchata babed viryavati gupta nirvirya tu prakasita. This knowledge of Hatha should be carefully guarded by the yogin who seeks accomplishment. Guard it. Then it remains potent. Publicly display it, loses its potency. Colonialism? Think it's over, my friends? This secret to guard Hatha Yoga should not be caricatured as a desire to keep these healthful practices away from humanity, it was a form of protection. These powerful disciplines were not to be separated from the Hindu dharma, from ethical preparation, from brahmacharya, from the guidance of the guru, from control of the senses, from proper conduct, mental steadiness, religious spiritual maturity, and the goal of liberation. The knowledge was guarded because the practices could be, to say the least, misunderstood, commercialized, misused, or reduced to their most visible effects. And that's precisely what has occurred. The outward techniques were extracted. The initiatory setting was completely discarded. The guru was basically dispensed with. And the students just become customers. Asana just become exercise. Guarded knowledge became a globally branded product. And imagine this in the other religious traditions of the world. Would they put up with that? Is baptism an underwater therapy? Is wine tasting a communion? So in these classic texts, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, we also have the Giranda Samhita, which prescribes a sevenfold discipline moving through purification, asana, mudra, pratyahara, pranayama, raja yoga, samadhi. Another classic text, the Siva Samhita, teaches guru-disciple discipline, asana, mudra, nadis, kundalini chakras, and liberation within a religious and yogic cosmology. And the very mystical Siddha Siddhanta Bharati with Gorakanath. He said, Yatovacho nivartanteya prapyas manasa saha. This experience is beyond speech. It's beyond the very mind that seeks to comprehend it. And interestingly, to his fellow Indian Hindu yogis, he said, Samyagetat najanati sa yogi nama drakaha. If you don't know these deeper aspects, Nav chakras, Kaladharam, Trilakshya, Panchavomikam, you're a yogi in name only, not a real yogi. What would such a yogi say of today's yogis, quote unquote? On the one side stands the Chandogya Upanishad. Do not mistake the body for the goal, for Atma Darshana, for the inner self, capital S. Remember, in the Hindu Yoga Dharma, when we use English, capital S, self, stands for the Atmana. Little s is the outer sense of self, the ahamkara, the ego, the personality, which must be refined and purified. Now, traditional Hatha Yoga doesn't proclaim itself to be the final destination. It calls itself a stairway. Classic Hindu yoga is Karma Yoga, Hindu ethics and seva, selfless service. And in order, actually, my friends. Bhakti Yoga, Hindu devotions. Raja Yoga, Hindu contemplations. Jnana Yoga, Hindu studies outwardly and inwardly. And within those classic four yogas, termed Charya Kriya Yogam and Jnanam in Tamil Hinduism, we have Hatha Yoga, Hindu devotional postures. Note, they are postures to the worship of the Atmana that flows through the animals, recognizing the wisdom of Bhumi Mata, Mother Nature, and the various creatures and the elements themselves, and specific worship of Hindu deities, not deities of any other religion, of course, because this is specifically the Hindu Dharma. We have Mantra Yoga, Hindu devotional chants, another word that's taken out of context today. Natya Yoga, Hindu devotional. Dance and Nada Yoga, Hindu devotional. Music, songs, bhajans, kirtan. So, have the Hindus once again, quote unquote, shot themselves in the foot? Hindus have celebrated the worldwide recognition of yoga as a civilizational triumph. The word yoga is now spoken in nearly every nation. Governments recognize it, schools teach it, hospitals recommend it, corporations offer it, studios sell it, the United Nations honors it. But what exactly has been recognized? Has the world accepted Hindu yoga? Or has it accepted the visible, physical, marketable reflection that yoga has been separated from Hindu Dharma, from the Upanishads, from Atmana, from moksha, guru, tapas? The name has traveled, the postures have traveled, the bodies have traveled, the photographs have traveled, but has the teaching traveled? Hindus may point proudly to millions performing asanas and declare the world has accepted yoga, but the Chandogya Upanishad asks a more uncomfortable question. Has the world accepted yoga, or has it merely left with Virocana? Hindus may have handed the world a mirror and pointed to the bodily reflection, and then accepted the world's declaration that the reflection was the whole of yoga. That is how a civilizational victory can become a spiritual surrender. So this essay, it's not an attack upon asana, nor on bodily health, public participation, or older people seeking mobility and dignity. The body is sacred, of course. The body is a mandir. The body is an instrument through which dharma, bhakti, raja, seva may be pursued. But a temple is not worshipped merely for its walls. An instrument is not mistaken for the musician. A doorway is not confused with a destination. Virocana sees the body and halts. Full stop. Indra begins with the body and continues inward and onward. The body is not the enemy of yoga. The reduction of yoga to the body is the problem. So the final question. Should International Yoga Day be rejected? Perhaps it should be completed. Let the body be honored, but don't stop with Virocana. Let health be encouraged, but do not confuse health with kaivalya, liberation, moksha, freedom, samadhi, calm wisdom. Let asana be practiced, but do not make the posture the whole path. Let the mirror be used, but teach the disciple to ask who's looking into the mirror. Now, obviously, we're in a very bodily oriented society. But Hindu teachers need to have the courage to lead others beyond this body infatuation. Otherwise, International Yoga Day will remain a global celebration of Virocana. And so on this morning, this day after the International Yoga Day, the decisive question is not how many nations participated, or how many bodies assembled, or how many photographs were taken, but did humanity begin the journey of Indra? Or did it leave it all behind with Virocana, satisfied with its own reflection? International Yoga Day may have showed humanity how the body can bend, but the Upanishads ask whether our identification can break. And you know, the truth often sounds absurd when error becomes normal. when error becomes common sense, quote unquote, history then teaches us something very uncomfortable. A society does not usually recognize its greatest errors, while those errors are still protected by custom, authority, economics, law perhaps, religion, and public approval. The error feels normal. The injustice feels necessary. The distortion feels like common sense. And the person who challenges it appears to be absurd. Let's be honest. There was a time when slavery was defended not merely as economically useful, but as natural, moral, and even divinely sanctioned. There was a time when many regarded the suggestion that women should vote as a threat to total social order. There was a time when racial segregation was defended as compatible with equality. There was a time when children working in dangerous factories and mines were treated as ordinary economic necessity. There was a time when colonial powers described domination as civilization. There was a time when indigenous children were separated from their languages, their religions, their families, their cultures in the name of education and improvement. There was a time, and not too long ago, when cigarette smoking was presented as sophisticated, normal, and harmless, even by doctors. The normalized systems did not feel irrational to those who were living comfortably within them. It was the challengers who felt irrational, closed-minded. The truth sounded extreme because the error had just become familiar. The familiarity of distortion, which is a difficult position, in which one may now find oneself when speaking honestly about yoga. To say that yoga is a Hindu religious and spiritual discipline is sometimes treated as simply being divisive or closed-minded. To say that Hatha Yoga was traditionally transmitted through guru, discipline, restraint, preparation, and basic secrecy is treated as antiquated, old school. To say that asana is not the whole of yoga is treated as unnecessary seriousness. To say that the classical purpose of yoga is liberation rather than bodily display is treated as philosophical excess. To say that a 200-hour course cannot authorize mastery is treated as elitism. To say that International Yoga Day may have celebrated the body while concealing the truth of yoga is treated as being absurd. But, fellow Hindus, all concerned individuals, are the Hindu texts absurd? What has happened is that reduction has become normalized. Is Chandogya Upanishad absurd? Was Prajapati absurd? Was Indra's 101 years of discipleship absurd? Is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika absurd? Giranda Samhita, Siva Samhita, and the Nava yogis, are they all absurd? Once this reductionism becomes normal, wholeness can sound extreme. Of course, this is to the superficial mind. Again, historically, the injustices of slavery, segregation, colonialism, forced assimilation, political exclusion, caused suffering on a huge scale that must never, ever be trivialized. The reduction of yoga is not equivalent, of course, to those crimes and cruelty, violence, and human cost. The comparison is not one of equal moral magnitude. However, it is a comparison of a mental structure, a mindset, which can turn into something worse. Human beings repeatedly become so accustomed to a system that they can no longer recognize its assumptions as assumptions. They mistake a familiarity for truth. They mistake institutional approval for legitimacy. They mistake popularity for accuracy. They mistake usefulness for goodness. They mistake commercial success for spiritual authenticity. A society can become so accustomed to a false arrangement that anyone who names that falsehood is criticized, looks ridiculous. The successful system just cannot see itself. Now, of course, modern bodily yoga is extraordinarily successful. It is taught in studios, corporations, hospitals, schools, gyms, senior centers, resorts, public parks, government programs. It's photographed, branded, certified, marketed, televised, and internationally celebrated. That success becomes its strongest argument. How could something so widely accepted be fundamentally incomplete? But acceptance proves only acceptance. It does not prove truth or fidelity. The question remains, what has been accepted? Has the world accepted Hindu yoga? Or has it accepted selected bodily techniques after their connection to Hindu dharma, guru, tapas, mantras, atma, moksha, samadhi, and sacred obligation has been weakened or totally removed? Has yoga conquered the world? Or has the world accepted the reflection while leaving the reality behind? Virocana's mistake becomes far more powerful when it is no longer merely personal. One disciple looks into the mirror and mistakes the body for the self. Then another repeats the teachings. Then teachers are trained to repeat it. Then institutions standardize it, package it, governments promote it. Then the world celebrates it. Eventually the interpretation no longer looks like an interpretation. It looks like the real thing. The mirror has gained authority. The camera validates the mirror. The crowd validates the camera. The institution validates the crowd. And International Yoga Day appears to validate the entire scheme. The fact that millions accept the first answer does not make it the final answer. And remember, folks, three things. There's the country, there's the ethnicity, and there's the religion. If more people realize perhaps that they could become Hindus regardless of what their ethnicity is or what country they come from, perhaps we would not be in this mess that we have today. Future generations may ask, how could they not see it? How could people have believed that women were unfit to vote? How could they have defended segregation as equality? How could they have described colonial domination as upliftment? How could they have permitted children to labor under brutal conditions and called it necessity? Yet, the people within those systems often believed that they were seeing clearly. Perhaps future generations will ask a similar question about yoga. How did people take a Hindu discipline directed towards liberation, reduce it to largely a bodily movement, separated entirely from the religion, its identity, and certify teachers after 200 hours? How did they turn a sacred practice into a public spectacle and then call the result universal yoga? And perhaps the answer will be because the distortion had become so familiar that the truth sounded ridiculous. Now we need some courageous individuals Look at Indra. Now, he initially accepted the same answer as Virocana. He looked into the same mirror, he saw his body, he hears the same teaching, but on his journey home, he begins to question. That moment's crucial. Indra does not remain trapped by the quote-unquote fact that he once believed to be the answer. He turns around. He returns to the Guru, and the Guru is just patiently waiting. He is willing to admit what I accepted may not be complete. The courage our age requires is the courage to turn around. Not the courage merely to defend yoga as it's currently marketed. Not the courage merely to gather large crowds. Not the quote-unquote courage merely to seek greater recognition. Not the quote-unquote courage to return to the texts. The courage to return to the gurus. The courage to return to the religious lifestyle from which yoga arose. The courage to say that what has become normal may not be normal. It might be incomplete at best. The courage to remain a disciple when the marketplace is eager to make everyone a teacher. Perhaps millions will continue to laugh. Perhaps they will say that insisting upon yoga's Hindu identity is narrow-minded. Perhaps they will say that speaking of Atma, Moksha, Samadhi, Guru, and sacred transmission is unnecessary. Perhaps they will say that bodily yoga is harmless, beneficial, and therefore beyond criticism. But benefits do not erase origins. Popularity does not erase meaning. Public approval does not erase scripture. And ridicule does not refute the truth. The question is not whether modern yoga benefits somebody. It clearly does. The question is whether those benefits justify calling the reflected body the whole of yoga. The Chandogya Upanishad already answered this. Virocana says yes, Indra says no. So, International Yoga Day has ended, but the Miro remains. The photographs remain, the certificates remains, the studio remains, the global consensus remains, and so does Prajapati's question. What do we see when we look in the mirror? Do we see a body and stop? Do we see flexibility and call it freedom? Do we see health and call it liberation? Do we see a global spectacle and call it a spiritual victory? Or do we, like Indra, begin to sense that the first answer is not necessarily the final answer? The purpose of this epilogue is not merely to condemn, it's to invite a return. A return from performance to practice. From certification to discipleship. From exhibition to sacred transmission. From the photographed body to the unseen seer. From yoga as a marketable product to yoga as a Hindu path of transformation and liberation. So a final appeal. For the non-Hindus and for the Hindus. To the non-Hindus, you can practice, but honestly, you can enjoy stretching, but then call it stretching and relaxation. Perhaps you enjoy controlled breathing, relaxation, improved balance, gentle movement. Then call it that. There's nothing wrong with that. Stretch, breathe, relax, strengthen the body, calm the nervous system, develop balance and mobility. But call these things honestly what they are. Stretching, relaxation, breath training, mindful movement, mobility practice, physical conditioning, and stress reduction. Fine. But there's no need to call that yoga. Give historical credit, perhaps, to Hatha Yoga where credit is due. Acknowledge, perhaps, that your methods were adopted from the Hatha Yoga of Hinduism. But if you do not wish to enter the tradition, then do not take its sacred vocabulary, religious authority, Sanskrit names, mantras, symbols, guru titles, yogi titles or claims of a spiritual depth, while denying the entire Dharma from which all of this came. Do not say this is yoga, but it has nothing to do with Hinduism. There are two honorable paths. The first, take the stretches and relaxation. Acknowledge the source of Hatha Yoga if that's where you learned it from, and then teach them as secular physical practices without falsely calling it yoga. The second, however, is to enter Hinduism honestly. Study. Learn from a qualified Hindu teacher. Understand the Dharma, Karma, Atma, Moksha, Guru, Mantra, Tapas, Bhakti, Karma, Bhakti, Raja, Jnana. Respect the devatas, respect the text, respect the religious world in which yoga lives. And yes, should sincere conviction arise, you could become a Hindu. A person need not be born in India to approach Shiva, Krishna, Hanuman, Devi, Ganapati, or the wisdom of the Upanishads with sincerity. Either practice something honestly secular or approach Hindu yoga dharma honestly as Hindu yoga. And to our fellow Hindus, stop apologizing for the dharma. The time's come, past time, to stop behaving as though naming Hindu dharma is an act of aggression. It is not aggression to tell the truth. It is not intolerance to protect a sacred inheritance. It is not divisiveness to say that yoga belongs within Hindu dharma. It is certainly not violence to correct a distortion. It is not fanaticism to refuse erasure. Too often, Hindus have been taught to confuse passivity or ahimsa with peace, silence with tolerance, self-erasure with humility. But the Hindu tradition does not teach cowardice. Remember Hanumanji. He was humble before Rama, but never weak before the Dharma. He kneels in devotion, yet leaps across oceans. He speaks gently when gentleness is appropriate, but confronts falsehood when Dharma requires it. His strength is not egotistic aggression. His strength is consecrated service. His courage is bhakti in action. His power belongs to Dharma. So, be humble before the divine, but do not become helpless before distortion. Remember the Kurukshetra. Arjuna stands between two armies and wishes to withdraw. His hesitation is understandable. He sees conflict, sorrow, consequence, moral complexity. But Krishna does not tell him to avoid responsibility so that he may appear peaceful. Krishna teaches him to see clearly, to act but without hatred, to perform his duty without selfish attachment, and to stand for dharma without being possessed by anger or personal ambition. Kurukshetra is, of course, not an excuse for violence. It is the eternal field upon which conscience may decide whether fear will disguise itself as so-called spirituality. And so, after International Virocana Day, let all of us make a different vow. Let non-Hindus practice honestly. Let Hindus speak courageously. Let teachers disclose truthfully. Let seekers go beyond the mirror. Let the body become a doorway rather than a prison of identification. Let hatha become a stairway rather than a stage. Let the discipline remain humble. And let those who love Dharma become brave enough to protect it. Do not merely admire Hanuman's strength. Serve as he served. Do not merely quote Krishna's teachings. Stand where dharma requires you to stand. Do not merely remember and speak tales of Kurukshetra. Recognize this is before you, within you, around you. Not with violence, never. Not with hatred, but with disciplined courage, religious spiritual responsibility, and an uncompromising truth. The world does not need Hindus who are ashamed of Hindu dharma. It needs Hindus who embody it, wisely, compassionately, fearlessly, and without apology, as Swami Vivekananda said, when the name Hindu sends a galvanic shock through your entire being, then and then alone are you a Hindu. And when you come to the aid of any Hindu in distress, then and then alone are you a dharma. Are you a Hindu? Hindu yoga dharma. And we begin and end with Mahaganapati. Remember, he stood up to protect his Mataji, symbolic of protecting the dharma. And he lost big. A reminder to all of us that we must stand for principles, and we won't always win. Sometimes we lose, and sometimes we lose big. But if we hang in there, everything will turn out all right in the end. Abhyavarada. Do the right thing. As we go from untruth to truth, ignorance to enlightenment, to our goal of Atma Darshana, that immortal nectar within. Om Asato Ma Sat Gamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya. Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Jai Hindu Yoga Dharma.